All right, 9 tips on how to squat if you've got bad knees. Now, I'm going to give these tips for anybody who's got some of those fancy medical conditions known as grouchy knees, angry knees, annoyed knees, but actually I would give these tips to anyone learning how to squat. So let's start with number 1. Position the bar below your traps, but above your delts. In other words, it's going to rest on your delts. This is because tip number 2, you are going to lean over as you squat. Now, I don't want to hear anything about, this feels like an unnatural position to place the bar down in that low position. Yes, I know placing it in the high bar position is an easier position, right? That's the untaught squat. That's the toddler's squat. That's the squat that every single toddler in the world, that's where they will place the bar when they can. But you are not a toddler, and you don't have the knees of a toddler, and you're more intelligent than a toddler. So you can learn to walk just like that toddler did. You can learn how to do a low bar squat. So you're going to put that bar in the low bar position. Tip number 2, remember you're going to lean over as you squat. Tip number 3, this goes along with leaning over. Because you're going to lean over, you're going to reach back with your hips when you squat. You're trying to use your hips and your knees, but you're not trying to do a squat that places the primary amount of the load on the knees, right? You're trying to do a squat that uses both joints to their respective abilities, right? The hips are the larger, stronger joint, so let's ask them to do a little more of the work. So you're going to really reach back with your hips and you're going to lean over. All right, that's tips 1, 2, and 3. Bar position, lean over, hips back. Tip number 4, now we get into some knee-specific things. When you take your stance, you're going to take a stance that's roughly shoulder width apart with your toes pointed out about 30 degrees. All right, so tip number 4 is you're going to point your knees in the direction of your toes. So that way we're not having any twisting at the knee joint. So your toes are going to act like arrows for your knees. That's the direction you're going to point your toes. Tip number 5, this one gets a little bit complicated, and that's why one of the later tips is going to help with this. Tip number 5 is you're going to stop your knees. In other words, they're going to go forward and out in the direction of your toes, but you're going to stop your knees roughly above your toes. They're going to take up that position about 1/3 to 1/2 of the way down into your squat, and they're just going to freeze in that position right above your toes, maybe a 1/2 inch in front of your toes. They're going to keep bending after that point, but they're not going to travel any further forward. If your knees are 2 or 3 inches in front of your toes, that's a problem. You're not looking to do that. Number 6, this isn't a technique issue, but this can very often help. The simple solution of use knee sleeves. If you've got some grouchy knees, use some knee sleeves. Don't bother with the 5mm ones. Just go out and get a nice pair of 7mm ones. We'll link to some pairs below. But get a pair of knee sleeves. They'll provide some warmth. They'll provide some compression for your knees. They will act like a very nice warm hug for your knees. And who doesn't want a nice warm hug? Number 7, if you're spending all this time watching me talk about the squat, for crying out loud, don't mess the whole thing up by lifting in squishy shoes. Squishy shoes make everything more difficult. Get yourself a pair of very rigid shoes, something like men's dress shoes, work boots, or hey, here's an idea, lifting shoes. Don't wear Chucks, it's killing me, don't wear Chucks. Get some lifting shoes. The best feature of a lifting shoe, good grief, Meggers, it's not the heel, it's the rigid sole, so that when you're trying to actually execute something like positioning your knees or reaching back with your hips or leaning over, you've got a solid surface for really efficient force transfer between you and the floor. Tip number 8, this is a big one. This particular equipment tip can help you with a lot of technique things earlier on, and that is the use of a tubo, a terribly useful block of wood. Now, don't make this a crutch, don't use it all the time, but this can be really useful with your empty bar warm-up every once in a while, maybe even a lighter warm-up. Don't use it for your work sets, but it's a terribly useful block of wood. You're going to place this, we've got a video on it, and we'll link to that below. We've got a couple actually, but you're going to place this in the position that your knee would stop. In other words, you're going to place you can use 2 of them or 1 of them, doesn't really matter, but you're going to place it in line with your toes, pretty much right at the edge of your foot, maybe a 1/2 inch in front of that, and you're going to tell yourself as you descend to touch your knees to the tubos and then freeze your knees there. In other words, they touch the tubos, they don't tip the tubos over. They don't even begin to tip the tubos over. So that will force you, because your knees have to stop there, for you to keep descending, you will have to reach back with your hips. Otherwise, you won't be able to go any lower. And because you have to reach back with your hips, you will have to lean over. So the tubo can help you with not allowing your knees to go too far forward. They can give you something very visual to aim for. And because they block your knees, they will force you to reach your hips back. They will force you to lean over. And by the way, leaning over is why we have the bar in that low position. Because with the bar in the high bar position, you can try to do all of these things that we're talking about. You can try to lean over, and you'll be able to do it to a certain extent, but you won't be able to get as leaned over. So you won't be able to shift as much of the load to your hips, because in the high bar position, that bar is going to want to crawl up your neck. And last but not least, tip number 9, all of these things can be handled by trying to do what's in this video, but man, they can be handled a lot quicker if you go out and get yourself a coach. It can be handled in one session. They can fix your squat in a real big hurry. We'd love to work with you on it. We can work with you remotely or better yet in person. My recommendation would be go find yourself a starting strength coach. They will help you in a real big hurry. As always, we hope this helps you get stronger and live better.